another mind mission on the Toad Cam. We've been looking into hemispheric integration, and there has been, I think, an unspoken and necessary relation with the big issue of process and content. Does process emerge from the right hemisphere? Does content emerge from the left hemisphere? Are they surrogate concepts for each other? Does one completely stand in for the other? Is the distinction between process and content an absolute isomorphism, with the distinction between right and left hemisphere processes or right and left hemisphere conceptual operations? If you look at an EEG, there's an area that's very popular now, neurofeedback, and there are numerous techniques it appears to conduct neurofeedback with, but the idea that you would put an electrode studded cap on someone's head and inject some conductive gel, so the signals that are being picked up through the skull, which by the way is an extremely good insulator, and then record those and play them, and teach the subject or the student or the patient how to choose to manipulate various forms of mental energy so a desired balance can occur between the right and left hemisphere, as shown on the EEG plot. Well, it seems like that's an awfully big stretch of the imagination to say that you are looking at one half of it is content and one half of it is form. Perhaps there are what we might call forms and contents on both the right and left side of the brain, operating in their own way. The right hemisphere and the left hemisphere do appear to have very, very important structural and functional differences. One thing that surprised me, I was reading along and the author was describing the way the right hemisphere has a preference for processing low frequency information, which are lower auditory frequencies, lower visual frequencies, lower frequencies of light. So I suppose that means in the deep red budging up against the infrared region would be the province of the right hemisphere, and higher frequencies, overtones, and the bluer end of the spectrum, and finer motor control would be executed more on the left hemisphere. So clearly we're talking about a whole body mind holism or integration which is taking place. So the really optimizing of the brain would be not, say, being a right hemisphere thinker or a left hemisphere thinker, but it appears the optimization occurs in the very fine coordination between right and left hemispheres to bring together, to cohere what we call experienced reality and internal reality is a very, very elegant and very, very precise timing engineering problem between the right and left hemispheres, which has led me to think several things. That many of the efforts that we're using to try to externally help us to harmonize and coordinate the hemispheres, such as the binaural beats CD, which are fairly plain recordings on CDs and MP3s of binaural beats, or the much more musical, I think the much better stuff that's done by Jeffrey Thompson with the gamma meditation system, the theta meditation systems, various meditational tools, recorded meditational tools, and mind machines, are all aiming for kind of the same, for common outcome, and that is to bring the operation of the right and left hemisphere into a coordinated state of harmony. personally, I've experienced being, I would describe myself probably somewhat superstitiously as being a very left hemisphere type of person. But when I do use the CDs and the various recordings and things on my computer, I very, very clearly feel a shift to what I would label as my right hemisphere self, my right hemisphere operations, which are far less chattery, far less linguistic, less semantic, much more in time, much more observational. So, yeah, I can see that a lot of people in modern life, especially people with advanced educations, can become very, very tilted over to the left hemisphere without even knowing it until it sort of completely dominates experience. Hang on, let those guys go by. And there are some EEG studies with people across socioeconomic levels that do seem to confirm that as people move into more intellectual labor and intellectual areas of life, they do become much more left hemisphere dominant, and then you might say they start becoming left hemisphere unilaterals. It becomes their personality, or what we would call their personality or their nature, kind of becomes inseparable from the way that their mental operations function, which is probably true of everyone. I'm sure it's true of everyone. However, it also appears that making very high quality judgments, or having what we would consider to be very clear, high quality intuitions, and when I hear the term intuition, I know that can be taken in a sort of superstitious way, but to me, intuition, what we call intuition, in my thinking, is very much about having very successful, high quality pattern matching. And that's probably what the right hemisphere being more of a parallel processing module. And again, that's complete, oversimplification. There are parallel processing all over the brain. The brain does a lot of parallel processing. But within that kind of mythological structure, the right brain does seem to have a much greater proclivity to doing heavy parallel processing and pattern matching and pattern discovery. I would suspect, because we see even at the level of sort of the basis of the universe, that there are fundamental differences of right and left. In molecules, that's called chirality. If it's rotated to the left or it's rotated to the right, it will behave the same molecule if it's just polarizes light in a right-hand direction or a left-hand direction. Will have a very, very different function in human metabolisms. All our amino acids are L amino acids. All our sugars are R sugars, right rotating sugars and left rotating amino acids, with one or two kind of strange little exceptions, man-made oddities. So it is almost inconceivable that if the universe, there is something fundamental in the universe, probably it's something at that very deep quantum or string or subquantum level, fundamental something about the universe that distinguishes between left and right. It's just one of those bizarre things that nobody fully, or even partially, or even probably to a small degree, fully understands why that left-right distinction takes place at the molecular level, at the atomic level. What is this thing with left and right? So intuition, I would say the probability is very great that what is commonly known, or in folk psychology called intuition, is a very, very strong and acute capacity for pattern matching versus story construction, where the left hemisphere seems to be much more about creating narratives and stories and storylines and kind of linear theories, where that kind of instant see it, feel it, VK connection is coming in on the right hemisphere as very much a grasp the pattern, have an immediate effective response to the pattern. I will park this here because that's been a lot of stuff.